June 26, 1943, late afternoon over northern France. Second Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson is flying tail-end Charlie, the most vulnerable position in the formation, when 16 Focke-Wulf 190s dive out of the sun. The German fighters hit hard and fast. Before Johnson can react, 20mm cannon shells hammer his P-47 Thunderbolt. The canopy shatters above his head. Glass and metal fragments fill the cockpit. A shell grazes his nose. Another sends shrapnel into his leg. The instrument panel explodes. Fire erupts in the cockpit. The Thunderbolt spins toward the ground, trailing smoke. Johnson tries to bail out. The canopy opens 6 inches and jams. He tries to squeeze through the shattered glass. His parachute snags on the frame. He's trapped in a burning aircraft that's falling out of the sky. Then something remarkable happens. Johnson reduces speed, forcing his attacker to overshoot. He feathers the propeller. The flames go out. The big Pratt & Whitney engine, despite the damage, keeps running, but his nightmare isn't over. A German fighter pulls alongside for the kill. Out of 20mm ammunition, the pilot switches to machine guns and systematically shoots the P-47 to pieces. Johnson can do nothing but fly straight, absorbing hit after hit, praying the engine holds together long enough to reach the English Channel. When Johnson finally lands at RAF Manston, ground crews count the damage: 21 20mm cannon shell hits and more than 200 machine gun bullets. The aircraft is written off as scrap. Johnson walks away, the P-47 Thunderbolt. The plane everyone said was too big, too heavy, too slow, but it brought Robert Johnson home when nothing else could have. This is the story of the most underestimated fighter of World War II and how it proved the doubters catastrophically wrong. To understand the Thunderbolt, you have to go back to 1940. Britain is getting hammered by the Luftwaffe. France has fallen. The U.S. Army Air Corps is watching nervously from across the Atlantic with fighters that are, frankly, obsolete. The P-40 Warhawk is outclassed by German Messerschmitts. The P-39 Airacobra looks good on paper but can't fight above 15,000 feet because its engine chokes out at altitude. The Army puts out contracts for a new fighter. They want speed, they want firepower, and most importantly, they want range. They need a fighter that can escort bombers deep into Germany and back. The problem is, nobody really knows how to build that yet. Enter Alexander Kartveli, chief engineer at Republic Aviation. Kartveli is a Georgian immigrant trained in Paris, speaks with a thick accent, and has an ego the size of Long Island. He's already designed the P-43 Lancer, a decent fighter, but nothing special. When the Army specs come across his desk in 1940, Kartveli looks at the requirements and does some math. The numbers don't work. To get the range they want, you need fuel, lots of fuel. To protect that fuel at high altitude, you need armor. To power all that weight, you need a massive engine. To cool that engine at 30,000 feet where the air is thin, you need enormous ducting. Everything spirals upward: weight, size, complexity. Most engineers would have compromised. Kartveli goes the opposite direction. He decides to build the biggest single-engine fighter anyone has ever seen. The design that emerges looks like nothing else in the sky. The fuselage is a massive barrel, nearly 5 feet in diameter. The engine, a Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp, produces 2,000 horsepower, making it one of the most powerful radial engines in existence. To harness that power, Kartveli adds a General Electric turbocharger system buried deep in the rear fuselage. Exhaust gases spin a turbine that compresses incoming air, forcing it into the engine. This system lets the R2800 maintain full power at altitudes where other engines gasp for oxygen. But turbochargers generate heat, enormous heat. So Kartveli runs ducting throughout the entire aircraft: intake scoops, exhaust channels, intercooler passages. The result is an airplane with more plumbing than a New York apartment building. Then there's the armament: 850 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, 4 in each wing, each gun fed by 425 rounds of ammunition, total firepower 3,400 rounds. When all 8 guns fire together, the recoil slows the aircraft by 15 miles per hour. Pilots report the whole plane shudders like it hit a brick wall. The first prototype rolls out in May 1941. It weighs 12,500 pounds empty, about 3,000 pounds heavier than a Spitfire. Fully loaded with fuel, ammunition, and a pilot, it tips the scales at over 17,000 pounds. For comparison, a Messerschmitt Bf-109 weighs around 6,000 pounds loaded. Republic's test pilot, Lowry Brabham, takes it up for the first flight. The control tower is nervous. This thing is so heavy, so unconventional. Brabham reports back, climbs like a homesick angel, hits 412 miles per hour in level flight, handles surprisingly well despite the bulk. The Army is impressed enough to order 171 aircraft. They designate it the P-47 Thunderbolt. Republic starts tooling up for production at their Farmingdale, New York facility. But there's a problem. This is 1941. America isn't even in the war yet. The Thunderbolt won't reach operational squadrons until early 1943. By then, the air war over Europe has evolved dramatically. The Luftwaffe has learned hard lessons. Their pilots are experienced, aggressive, and flying excellent aircraft. The P-47 is about to face the ultimate test, and first impressions are not going to be good. January 1943. The first P-47s arrive in England, assigned to the 56th Fighter Group based at Horsham St. Faith. The American pilots who've been flying Spitfires take one look at their new mounts and groan audibly. Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zemke, commanding officer of the 56th, walks around a Thunderbolt on the flight line. He's a serious, no-nonsense officer from Montana, and he's trying to hide his disappointment. The thing is enormous. The cockpit sits so high off the ground that pilots need a small ladder just to climb in. The visibility straight ahead is terrible. That massive nose blocks everything. Sitting in the cockpit feels like sitting in a bathtub. The jokes start immediately. The Jug, they call it. Some pilots swear it stands for Juggernaut, but everyone knows it really means the plane looks like a milk jug. Others call it the 7-ton milk bottle. One pilot writes home, "They've given us a fighter that's bigger than some bombers." The British are even less impressed. RAF pilots are used to nimble Spitfires that dance through the sky. They watch American pilots taxi these behemoths and shake their heads. One RAF officer reportedly says, "Your chaps are going to need those 8 machine guns, because they won't be able to maneuver worth a damn." The complaints pile up during training. The P-47 doesn't turn well. Its turning radius is wider than a Messerschmitt or Focke-Wulf. It's not particularly fast in level flight compared to the latest German fighters. The cockpit visibility issues make it hard to spot enemies. The rate of roll, how fast it can flip from one bank to another, is sluggish because of those massive wings. Worse, the early models have problems. The R2800 engine occasionally swallows valves, causing catastrophic failures. The turbocharger system is complex and temperamental. Pilots report that the gun heaters fail at altitude, causing the 50 cals to freeze. In the cold air at 25,000 feet, you might pull the trigger and get nothing but clicks. Morale is low. These pilots know they're about to face some of the best fighter pilots in the world, flying proven aircraft. And they're going into combat in a plane that feels like a flying barn. The first combat missions in April 1943 do nothing to improve confidence. The P-47s are assigned bomber escort duty, shepherding B-17 flying fortresses on daylight raids into occupied Europe. The problem is range. Even with external drop tanks, the early P-47s can only escort the bombers about 175 miles into enemy territory before they have to turn back. The bombers continue deeper into Germany, unprotected, and get slaughtered by Luftwaffe fighters. And when the P-47s do encounter German fighters, the results are mixed at best. The Thunderbolt pilots try to dogfight, turning and twisting with Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs. They're getting beaten. The German pilots have years of combat experience. They know how to exploit the P-47's weaknesses, force it into turning fights where it can't compete, attack from above where its poor visibility creates blind spots. On April 15, 1943, the 4th Fighter Group loses 4 P-47s in a single engagement without scoring any kills. The pilots who make it back are furious. They want Spitfires. They want Mustangs. They want anything except this overweight monstrosity. Hub Zemke gathers his pilots. He's been studying the combat reports, talking to every pilot who's engaged the enemy. And he's starting to see something. The P-47 isn't losing because it's a bad airplane. It's losing because they're fighting it wrong. Zemke stands in front of a blackboard and draws a simple diagram. "Stop trying to turn with them," he says. "We're never going to outturn a 109 or a 190. That's not what this airplane does." He explains his theory. The P-47 has advantages, but they're not the traditional fighter virtues of agility and maneuverability. First, it's tough. The radial engine can absorb tremendous punishment. The armor plating is thicker than other fighters. The fuel tanks are self-sealing. Second, it's fast in a dive. That massive weight becomes an advantage when gravity takes over. Third, those 850 caliber guns hit like a freight train when they connect. Zemke lays out new tactics. Use altitude. The turbocharger gives the P-47 better performance above 25,000 feet than anything the Germans have. Start every engagement with an altitude advantage. Dive on the enemy, make one high-speed pass with all 8 guns blazing, then use that speed to zoom back up to altitude. Never, ever get sucked into a slow-speed, turning fight. He calls it boom and zoom, attack from above, strike hard, escape before the enemy can react. The pilots are skeptical, but willing to try anything. In the next few missions, using these new tactics, the kill ratios start to improve. Slowly at first, then dramatically. But the real transformation happens when the Thunderbolt finds its true calling. And it has nothing to do with air-to-air combat. Summer 1943. A P-47 pilot named Robert Johnson is heading home from a bomber escort mission when he spots something below. A German supply train moving through the French countryside, completely exposed. Johnson has ammunition left. He's at 15,000 feet with tons of kinetic energy, waiting to be converted into speed. He rolls inverted and dives. The P-47 accelerates like a dropped anvil. Johnson pulls out of the dive at treetop level, the airspeed indicator pushing 500 miles per hour. He lines up on the locomotive and squeezes the trigger. 8 machine guns converge their fire. The 50 caliber rounds, each one half an inch in diameter, each one carrying enormous kinetic energy, tear into the train like a chainsaw. The locomotive's boiler explodes. Steam and metal fragments erupt into the sky. Johnson pulls up, adrenaline surging, and circles back. The train is derailed, cars overturned, German soldiers scattering into the fields. Johnson lands back at base and files his report. His commanding officer reads it with interest. Within weeks, the orders change. The P-47 units are cleared to engage targets of opportunity on the way home from escort missions. Trains, trucks, airfields, anything moving on the ground. The pilots discover something remarkable. The P-47 is nearly indestructible at low altitude. That massive radial engine sits in front of the pilot like a shield, soaking up ground fire that would destroy liquid-cooled engines in other fighters. The armor plating stops most small arms fire. The rugged construction handles the stress of low-level flying over rough terrain. And those 850 caliber guns are devastating against ground targets. A locomotive is an easy kill. Trucks explode. Supply depots burn. The Germans start calling P-47s J-Bos, short for Jagdbomber, fighter bomber. But there's fear in the word. Republic Aviation sees the potential and starts developing the P-47D variant specifically optimized for ground attack. They add hardpoints under the wings for bombs and rockets. 10 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets, or up to 2,500 pounds of bombs. The Thunderbolt transforms from a pure fighter into a multi-role attack aircraft. By late 1943, Thunderbolt units are wreaking havoc across occupied Europe. They develop tactics for different targets. Trains get attacked from the side, aim for the boiler. Tank columns get strafed from the rear, where armor is thinnest. Airfields get hit in coordinated strikes, rockets first to crater the runways, then bombs on the hangars, then strafing passes on parked aircraft. The numbers are staggering. In one 6-month period in 1944, P-47 units destroy over 6,000 locomotives, thousands of trucks and armored vehicles, hundreds of aircraft caught on the ground. The German supply network starts to collapse. Units at the front run out of fuel, ammunition, food, all because trains aren't getting through. But the missions are dangerous. Flying low and slow makes you vulnerable. Germans, flak, anti-aircraft artillery is everywhere. 20mm and 37mm cannons that can shred an aircraft in seconds. The Germans learned to defend their supply routes, placing flak batteries along railroad lines and major roads. P-47 pilots develop a saying, "If you can see the ground can see you." They learn to stay fast, never make more than one pass on a heavily defended target, and always have an escape route planned. The casualty rates for ground attack missions are higher than air-to-air combat, but the impact on the German war effort is undeniable. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, commanding German forces in France in 1944, writes in his diary that Allied fighter bombers, especially the P-47, have made daytime movement nearly impossible. His supplies are being destroyed faster than they can be replaced. Still, there's a persistent myth that the P-47 can't compete with German fighters in air-to-air combat, that it's just a bomb truck, useful for ground attack but inferior as a pure fighter. Then comes June 6, 1944, D-Day, and the Thunderbolt proves exactly what it can do when everything is on the line. June 6, 1944, 0400 hours. Dozens of P-47 squadrons across England fire up their engines in the pre-dawn darkness. The invasion of Normandy is beginning, and the Thunderbolt units have a simple mission: own the sky. By this point, the P-47 force in Europe has grown to over 30 fighter groups, thousands of aircraft. The pilots have 18 months of combat experience. The tactics have been refined. The aircraft itself has evolved. The P-47 D-25 variant has a bubble canopy instead of the old Razorback design, dramatically improving visibility. External fuel tanks extend the range to over 800 miles, meaning they can now escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back. Over Normandy on D-Day, the Luftwaffe tries to contest the landings. They send up everything they have left: Messerschmitts, Focke-Wulfs, even a few of the new FW-190D models with improved high-altitude performance. They run straight into a wall of Thunderbolts. The air battles that day showcase everything the P-47 has become. Thunderbolt pilots use their altitude advantage, diving on German formations with devastating effect. When caught in turning fights, they use a tactic called the Lufbury Circle. Two P-47s fly in a defensive circle, each protecting the other's tail. The Germans can't break through without exposing themselves to fire. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabreski, one of the top American aces, downs 3 FW-190s in a single mission. He describes the engagement later. "We had altitude, we had speed, and when those 8 guns hit, the German fighters just came apart. The .50 caliber is a powerful round. You don't need many hits." The statistics from D-Day are remarkable. Allied fighters shoot down over 100 German aircraft while losing fewer than 20 of their own. The P-47 accounts for a disproportionate number of those kills. More importantly, the Luftwaffe is driven from the sky. The invasion force lands with almost no interference from German aircraft. In the weeks after D-Day, P-47 units transition to supporting the ground advance. They operate from temporary airstrips in Normandy, flying close air support missions for American troops pushing inland. This is where the Thunderbolt truly shines. A forward air controller spots a German Panther tank dug in behind a hedgerow, pinning down an American infantry company. He radios coordinates to a P-47 flight circling overhead. Within minutes, 4 Thunderbolts roll in. First pass, rockets. The 5-inch HVAR, high-velocity aircraft rocket, can penetrate tank armor. 2 rockets hit near the Panther. The crew bails out. Second pass. The P-47s strafe the position with machine guns, suppressing any remaining resistance. The infantry advances. The whole engagement takes less than 5 minutes from radio call to target destroyed. The German Army has never faced anything like this level of coordinated air-ground cooperation. As Allied forces break out of Normandy and race across France, P-47s range ahead, destroying German forces trying to retreat. The Falaise Pocket in August 1944 becomes a killing ground. Thousands of German vehicles packed into a narrow corridor trying to escape encirclement. P-47s and other Allied fighters attack in relays, dropping bombs and firing rockets until the entire pocket is a smoldering ruin. A German officer captured after Falaise is quoted in interrogation reports, "We could not move in daylight. The Jabos were everywhere. We would hear them before we saw them." That distinctive sound of the American radial engine, then the rockets and the machine guns. Our vehicles burned. Our men died in their trucks. There was nowhere to hide. By September 1944, the Luftwaffe has effectively ceased to exist as an offensive force in Western Europe. German pilots still fly, still fight, but they're outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of fuel. The few experienced aces remaining avoid combat when possible, knowing each flight might be their last. The P-47 groups shift focus almost entirely to ground attack. They destroy bridges, fuel depots, rail yards, anything supporting the German war machine. The 8th and 9th Air Forces, flying primarily P-47s and P-51 Mustangs, claim destruction of over 68,000 German trucks, 9,000 locomotives, 6,000 armored vehicles, and 7,000 aircraft, most caught on the ground. But the Thunderbolt story isn't just about destruction statistics, it's about the men who flew it and what the airplane let them survive. Robert Johnson, again, June 26, 1943. Early in the Thunderbolt's combat career, before its reputation for toughness is fully established. Johnson is escorting bombers over France when his flight is jumped by German fighters. In the chaos, Johnson gets separated. A Focke-Wulf 190 latches onto his tail, pilot intent on the kill. Johnson tries everything, turns, dives, climbs. The FW-190 stays with him. Cannon, shells walking up the fuselage. The Thunderbolt is hit repeatedly. 20mm shells punch through the tail, the wings, the fuselage. Johnson's canopy shatters. Fragments of glass and metal fill the cockpit. He's wounded, bleeding, half-blinded. The controls are sluggish. Some of the cables have been severed. The German pilot pulls alongside, probably expecting Johnson to bail out. But Johnson stays with the aircraft. The FW-190 makes several more passes, firing until it runs out of ammunition. Then, inexplicably, the German pilot salutes and breaks off. Johnson nurses the shattered P-47 back across the English Channel. The aircraft is barely flying. The engine is running rough. Holes in the cowling letting air disrupt the cooling. The hydraulics are gone. He'll have to land gear up. He makes it to the English coast, crash lands in a field. When the ground crew examines the aircraft, they count over 200 hits. Cannon shells, machine gun rounds. The tail section is mostly gone, just stringers and skin hanging in tatters. The fuselage looks like Swiss cheese. The wings have holes you could put your fist through. But the engine kept running. The controls still worked. The pilot walked away. Johnson's P-47 is repaired and returned to service. He goes on to fly it for several more missions before being assigned a new aircraft. The stories multiply. A P-47 pilot named Michael Quirk takes a direct hit from an 80mm flak shell. The shell passes through the cockpit between his legs without detonating. It exits through the floor, leaving 2 massive holes. Quirk lands the aircraft successfully, climbs out shaking, and refuses to fly for 3 days. Another pilot, William Dunham, is hit by ground fire that severs his rudder cables. He flies 90 miles back to base using only the ailerons and elevators, lands safely. Glenn Duncan's P-47 collides with a German Bf-109 in a dogfight. The collision tears off 3 feet of Duncan's right wing. The Thunderbolt goes into a violent spin. Duncan manages to regain control and fly the asymmetric aircraft back to England, where he makes a controlled crash landing. In the Pacific Theater, where the Army Air Force also deploys P-47s, a pilot named Neil Kirby uses his Thunderbolt to down 6 Japanese aircraft in a single mission. He survives being hit by return fire multiple times, the R-2800 engine absorbing damage that would have destroyed other fighters. The common thread, that enormous radial engine. The Pratt & Whitney R-2800 is a massive hunk of metal, 18 cylinders, hundreds of pounds of steel and aluminum. Bullets and shell fragments that would punch through a liquid-cooled inline engine just embed themselves in the R-2800's thick cylinder blocks. You can shoot half the cylinders off an R-2800 and it'll keep running on the rest. The pilots notice. Confidence builds. They start pushing the envelope, taking risks they wouldn't in other aircraft. Low-level strafing runs through heavy flak, dogfights at odds of 4 against 1. The knowledge that the Thunderbolt can take punishment and keep flying makes them aggressive. By mid-1944, P-47 pilots have the highest morale of any fighter group in Europe. They request to stay on Thunderbolts even when offered transitions to the newer P-51 Mustang. The Mustang is faster, more nimble, has better range. But P-47 pilots trust their aircraft in ways Mustang pilots don't. Colonel Zemke is asked in 1944 why he hasn't switched the 56th Fighter Group to Mustangs when other groups have. He says simply, "The P-47 brings my boys home. That matters more than speed." The 56th Fighter Group, flying P-47s exclusively throughout the war, ends up with the highest air-to-air kill count of any American fighter group in Europe, 674 confirmed aerial victories. They produce more aces, pilots with 5 or more kills, than any other group. But it's not just the European theater where the Thunderbolt proves itself. In the Pacific, the story is different, but equally dramatic. The P-47 arrives in the Pacific in 1943, and immediately the Army Air Force realizes they have a problem. The Pacific War is fought over vast distances, island to island, airfield to airfield, hundreds of miles of empty ocean. Range is everything. The early P-47 models can't carry enough fuel to be effective, but the Thunderbolt has something the Japanese don't expect: durability and firepower. The Japanese fighters, the vaunted Zero, the Oscar, the Tony, are built for maneuverability and climb rate. They sacrifice armor and pilot protection to save weight. A few hits from 50 caliber guns, and they disintegrate. The P-47, meanwhile, is essentially immune to Japanese fighter armament. The Zero's 7.70 and 20mm guns simply don't have enough hitting power to bring down a Thunderbolt quickly. Pilots report being hit dozens of times by Zero fire and barely noticing. Charles Lindbergh, yes, that Charles Lindbergh, serves as a civilian consultant in the Pacific in 1944. He flies P-47s on combat missions, testing fuel efficiency techniques. He discovers that by carefully managing mixture and throttle settings, he can extend the P-47's range by hundreds of miles. His techniques are adopted across the theater. With improved range, the P-47 becomes the dominant fighter in the Southwest Pacific. It operates from bases in New Guinea, the Philippines, supporting MacArthur's island-hopping campaign. The missions are brutal: long over-water flights, attacks on heavily defended targets, operating from primitive jungle airstrips. The Thunderbolt excels. The R-2800 engine, with its robust construction, handles the tropical environment better than liquid-cooled engines. Dust, humidity, coral debris, conditions that cause other engines to fail, barely affect the R-2800. Maintenance crews love it. They can swap out a damaged engine in hours, get an aircraft back in the air quickly. Neil Kirby, mentioned earlier, becomes the P-47's greatest ace in the Pacific. Flying from New Guinea, he develops tactics specifically for fighting Japanese aircraft. Use the P-47's diving speed to boom and zoom just like in Europe. Never turn with a zero, it'll outturn you every time. But catch it in a dive or a high-speed pass, and the 850s will saw it in half. On October 11, 1943, Kirby leads a flight of 4 P-47s against a formation of over 40 Japanese aircraft, bombers escorted by fighters. The Americans are outnumbered 10-1. Kirby dives into the formation, guns blazing. In the span of 3 minutes, he shoots down 6 Japanese aircraft, 3 bombers and 3 fighters. His wingmen account for 3 more. The Japanese formation scatters in confusion. The bombers jettison their loads and flee. Kirby and his flight return to base without losses. For this action, Kirby receives the Medal of Honor. He's killed in action 3 months later, but his tactics become standard for P-47 operations in the Pacific. As the war moves closer to Japan, P-47s join the strategic bombing campaign. They escort B-29 superfortresses on raids against Japanese cities. They strafe airfields, shoot up coastal installations, hunt shipping. The final role for Pacific P-47s is ground support during the planned invasion of Japan, an invasion that never happens because of the atomic bombs. But in the summer of 1945, P-47 groups are positioned in Okinawa and Iwo Jima, ready to support the landings. They've been equipped with napalm tanks and specialized bombs for destroying fortifications. The Japanese defenders call the P-47 the most feared American aircraft. Not because it's the fastest or most maneuverable, but because when it attacks, nothing survives. In total, P-47s in the Pacific destroy over 3,700 Japanese aircraft, the majority caught on the ground. They sink or damage hundreds of ships. They support every major landing operation from the Philippines to Okinawa. By war's end, the P-47 Thunderbolt is the most produced American fighter in history, 15,686 aircraft built. Only the Soviet Union's Yak series exceeds this number. The Thunderbolt has flown more combat missions than any other American fighter. It has dropped more bombs, fired more ammunition, destroyed more ground targets, and yet, after the war, it's almost immediately forgotten. August 1945. The war ends. Within months, the Army Air Force starts scrapping P-47s by the thousands. They're lined up in fields, cut apart, melted down. The military wants jet fighters now. The Thunderbolt is obsolete before its final combat missions are even debriefed. Some P-47s go to Allied nations, France, Brazil, Mexico, Italy, where they serve for a few more years. A few National Guard units keep them into the early 1950s. But by 1955, the P-47 has essentially vanished from military service. The historical narrative shifts too. The P-51 Mustang, with its sleek lines and long range, becomes the iconic American fighter of World War II. Aviation historians write about Mustangs escorting bombers to Berlin, Mustangs winning the air war. The Thunderbolt, bulky and unglamorous, gets relegated to footnotes. This is deeply unfair. The numbers tell a different story. Total air-to-air victories. P-47 pilots score 3,752 confirmed kills in Europe alone. Add Pacific kills, and the number exceeds 5,000. The P-51 Mustang scores around 4,150 total. Ground attack effectiveness. P-47s destroy nearly twice as many ground targets as P-51s. The Thunderbolt drops 132,000 tons of bombs, fires 135 million rounds of ammunition, launches 60,000 rockets. Survivability. The P-47 has the lowest loss rate of any American fighter conducting ground attack missions. For every 100 P-47 sorties against ground targets, 0.7 aircraft are lost. The comparable number for P-51s is 1.2, for P-38s it's 1.8. The men who flew the Thunderbolt never forget it. Decades after the war, reunions of P-47 pilot groups draw hundreds of veterans. They swap stories, remember friends lost, celebrate the aircraft that brought them home. Francis Gabreski, who ends the war as the top American ace in Europe with 28 kills, says in a 1990s interview, "The P-51 was a fine aircraft, but I flew the P-47 by choice. It was forgiving, it was tough, and it did everything they asked of it." Robert Johnson, who survives that devastating attack in 1943 and goes on to score 27 victories, writes a memoir titled Thunderbolt. He credits the aircraft with saving his life multiple times. Hub Zemke keeps a photo of his P-47 in his study until his death in 1994. Today, fewer than 10 airworthy P-47s exist worldwide. They appear at air shows, that distinctive radial engine rumble unmistakable. When one flies a low pass, you can feel the sound in your chest. Aviation historians have reassessed the Thunderbolt in recent decades. The consensus: it was the most versatile American fighter of the war. Not the best at any one thing, not the fastest, not the most maneuverable, not the longest range, but the best combination of capabilities, a true multi-role aircraft before the term existed. And there's something fitting about that. The Thunderbolt was never about elegance or glamour. It was about getting the job done and bringing the pilot home. In that, it succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. To really understand what made the P-47 work, you need to look at the engineering decisions that went into it. Alexander Kartveli's design wasn't just big for the sake of being big. Every ounce of weight served a purpose. Start with the turbo supercharger system. This is the key to the Thunderbolt's high-altitude performance. At 30,000 feet, the air is thin, about one-third the pressure at sea level. A naturally aspirated engine loses roughly 70% of its power at that altitude. It just can't breathe. The General Electric B-Series turbocharger on the P-47 solves this. Exhaust gases from the R2800 engine spin a turbine wheel at over 20,000 RPM. That turbine drives a compressor wheel that forces air into the engine at sea level pressure or higher. The R2800 produces full power at 30,000 feet, sometimes more power than at sea level, because the compressed air is also cooled. But compressed air gets hot. Thermodynamics dictates that compression heats the gas. Hot air is less dense, which defeats the purpose. So Kartveli adds an intercooler, a heat exchanger that cools the compressed air before it enters the engine. The intercooler sits in the wing roots, using ram air to carry away heat. The entire system is complex. Ducting runs from the engine, back to the turbocharger in the rear fuselage, then forward again to the intercooler, then back to the engine. Wastegate valves regulate boost pressure. Temperature sensors monitor conditions throughout. It's a marvel of engineering for 1941, but it's also temperamental. Early pilots learned to manage the system carefully, avoid overboosting, watch the temperature gauges. The armament system is equally sophisticated. 850 caliber M2 Brownings, 4 in each wing, mounted outboard of the propeller arc. Each gun fires 800 rounds per minute, synchronized to fire in pairs to manage recoil. The guns are bore-sighted to converge at 300 yards. This creates a kill zone where all 8 streams of bullets intersect. The ammunition load is 425 rounds per gun, belt-fed from boxes in the wing. That's about 32 seconds of sustained fire if you hold the trigger down. Experienced pilots fire in short bursts, 1 to 2 seconds, walking the tracers onto target. The 50 caliber round itself is devastating. The standard load is a mix of armor-piercing incendiary, tracer, and ball ammunition. API rounds can penetrate 30 mm of armor at 500 yards. They ignite fuel tanks, detonate ammunition, destroy engines. When all 8 guns hit simultaneously, the target, whether an aircraft, a truck, or a locomotive, simply disintegrates. The structural design reflects the punishment the aircraft is expected to take. The fuselage is a semi-monocoque construction. Skin panels carry load, reinforced by internal stringers and bulkheads. The wing spars are massive I-beams, capable of withstanding 12 Gs positive, 6 Gs negative. Combat damage reports show P-47s landing with entire sections of wing blown away, the remaining structure still strong enough to support flight loads. Armor protection is comprehensive. The pilot sits in an armored tub, steel plates on the seatback, headrest, floor, and sides. The windscreen is bulletproof glass, 2 inches thick. Total armor weight, about 300 pounds. That's heavier than some entire aircraft engines of the era. The fuel system uses self-sealing tanks, rubber bladders with multiple layers that swell when punctured by bullets or shell fragments, sealing the hole. This technology, developed just before the war, saves countless lives. A fighter with non-sealing tanks can lose all fuel in minutes from a single hit. The P-47's tanks can take dozens of hits and still retain fuel. Landing gear is beefy, has to be, to support 17,000 pounds at touchdown. The main gear legs are massive struts that retract inward into the wing. The tail wheel is also large and robust. Early models have some ground handling issues. The tail dragger configuration makes it hard to see over the nose while taxiing, but pilots adapt. One final detail that pilots love: the cockpit heater actually works. Sounds minor, but at 30,000 feet in winter over Europe, temperatures drop to 40 below zero. Other fighters have inadequate heating. Pilots fly missions in electrically heated suits, still arrive back at base half frozen. The P-47's heater, drawing warmth from the turbocharger system, keeps the cockpit comfortable. It's these details, the heating system, the armor, the robust landing gear, that reveal the P-47's design philosophy. This is an airplane built for professional military pilots conducting dangerous missions far from home. Everything serves the mission. Everything is designed to maximize the pilot's chances of survival and success. In that sense, the P-47 represents American industrial might at its peak. It's not a sports car, it's a tank. And it wins by being tougher, stronger, more capable than anything the enemy can field. The P-47 didn't stay static. Over the course of production, Republic produced numerous variants, each addressing specific issues or requirements. The P-47B was the initial production model, entering service in late 1942, only 170 built. Identified issues: poor rearward visibility, inadequate radio equipment, some engine problems. The P-47C incorporated fixes: better radio, improved engine reliability, a slightly longer fuselage for better aerodynamics. This is the version that first sees major combat in early 1943, about 600 built. The P-47D is where production explodes. Over 12,000 D models are built between 1943 and 1945, making it by far the most common variant. The D model comes in 2 major sub-variants. The Razorback D models have the original design, a turtle deck fuselage behind the cockpit that limits rearward visibility. Pilots complain constantly about the blind spot behind them. Starting with the D-25 production block, Republic introduces the bubble canopy. This is a British invention, first used on Spitfires and Typhoons. It's a clear plexiglass dome that gives 360-degree visibility. The first time P-47 pilots fly the bubble-top variant, they're amazed. They can see directly behind, above, below. The tactical advantage is enormous. The bubble canopy D models also get other improvements: stronger airframe, better control harmony, upgraded versions of the R2800 engine producing up to 2,800 horsepower with water injection for emergency boost. Water injection is a clever system. The pilot can activate an emergency boost that injects a water methanol mixture into the engine, temporarily increasing power by 25–30%. This is useful for emergency situations, escaping enemy fighters, catching fleeing targets, climbing quickly. The downside, it only lasts about 15 minutes before the water tank is empty, and it increases engine wear. The P-47M is a specialized high-speed variant developed to counter the V-1 flying bomb threat in 1944. It has a modified R-2800 engine with better high-speed performance, reaching 470 km in level flight. Only about 130 M models are built, used exclusively by the 56th Fighter Group. They're effective at intercepting V-1s, but the engine modifications make them less reliable. The P-47N is the final production variant, designed specifically for the Pacific Theater. The major change? Longer wings with increased fuel capacity. The N model carries 1,266 gallons of fuel internally and with external tanks, giving it a range of over 2,000 miles. This allows it to escort B-29s on missions to Japan from bases in the Marianas. The P-47N also incorporates all the improvements from the late D models: bubble canopy, water injection, upgraded armament options. It's arguably the best overall version of the Thunderbolt. About 1,800 are built before production ends in September 1945. Republic also develops experimental variants that never reach production. The XP-47J is a lightweight racer version that reaches 505 km/h in level flight in 1944, the fastest piston engine P-47 ever built. Only one is constructed. The XP-47H tests a different engine, a liquid-cooled Chrysler inline instead of the R-2800 radial. It performs well, but offers no advantages over the standard model, so the project is canceled. Throughout all these variants, the core design remains the same. That massive radial engine, the turbocharger system, the 850 caliber guns. The improvements are refinements, not fundamental changes. This evolutionary approach works because the basic design is sound. Kartveli got the fundamentals right in 1940. Everything after is optimization. Every great aircraft creates legends among those who fly it. The P-47 is no exception. Start with Francis Gaby Gabreski. A Polish-American from Oil City, Pennsylvania, Gabreski starts the war flying P-40s. He transitions to P-47s in 1943 with the 56th Fighter Group. By 1944, he's the leading ace in the European theater. Gabreski's approach to combat is methodical, almost scientific. He studies every engagement, learns from every mission. He develops a particular technique for deflection shooting, aiming ahead of a moving target to account for the target's speed and the bullet's travel time. It's geometry and physics, calculated in split seconds while pulling Gs and dodging return fire. On July 5, 1944, Gabreski scores his 28th victory, making him the top American ace in Europe at that time. 20 days later, his luck runs out. He's strafing a German airfield when his propeller strikes the ground. The P-47 crashes. Gabreski survives but is captured. He spends the rest of the war as a POW. After the war, Gabreski stays in the Air Force, flies F-86 Sabres in Korea, scores 6.5 more victories, making him one of only 7 American pilots to achieve ace status in 2 wars. He retires as a colonel in 1967, always crediting the P-47 as the aircraft that taught him to fight. Robert S. Johnson, mentioned several times already, finishes the war with 27 victories. What's remarkable about Johnson is his survival instinct. He's shot down once, crash lands multiple times, returns from missions with aircraft so damaged they're written off. His philosophy: the goal isn't to be a hero, it's to go home. Johnson develops a tactic called the Lufbery Circle for defensive fighting. If attacked by superior numbers, 2 P-47s fly in a tight circle, each protecting the other's tail. Any enemy trying to attack one P-47 exposes himself to fire from the other. It's simple, effective, and saves lives. Gerald Johnson, no relation to Robert, scores 18 victories and becomes the first ace in the Pacific Theater flying the P-47. He flies from New Guinea, mostly bomber escort and ground attack missions. He describes the P-47 as the perfect aircraft for jungle warfare. It's so tough that it handles the rough airstrips, the weather, everything the Pacific throws at it. Neil Kirby, already mentioned for his 6-kill mission, represents a different kind of ace. Kirby is aggressive to the point of recklessness. He actively seeks combat, often taking on numerically superior forces. His October 1943 mission, downing 6 Japanese aircraft while outnumbered 10-1, earns him the Medal of Honor. 3 months later, Kirby is leading a patrol near Wewak, New Guinea. His flight encounters a formation of Japanese fighters. Kirby dives to attack. He shoots down one, damages another, then gets separated from his wingman. Multiple Japanese fighters converge on him. His P-47 is hit repeatedly and goes down. Kirby doesn't bail out. He's either killed in the cockpit or chooses to ride the aircraft down. His body is never recovered. He's 33 years old. Then there's Hub Zemke, the tactician. Zemke doesn't have the highest kill count, 1775 victories, but his impact on P-47 operations is immeasurable. He's the one who figures out how to fight the Thunderbolt effectively. Boom and zoom. Energy fighting. Use the strengths. Avoid the weaknesses. Zemke also cares deeply about his pilots. He studies losses, identifies patterns, changes tactics to reduce casualties. The 56th Fighter Group under Zemke's command has one of the lowest loss rates per mission in the 8th Air Force. In October 1944, Zemke is flying a P-51 Mustang, temporarily assigned to a different unit when he encounters a violent storm. The turbulence rips the aircraft apart. Zemke bails out over Germany, is captured, and spends the rest of the war as a POW. He survives, returns home, and remains an advocate for the P-47 until his death. There are also the lesser-known aces, pilots like Walker Bud Mahurin, 1975 victories, Quince Brown, 12.5 victories, plus extensive ground attack work. David Schilling, 22.5 victories, known for experimental long-range flights that prove the P-47's capability, and the ground attack specialists who never become famous but do the dirty, dangerous work. Pilots who fly 3 missions a day, attacking trains and trucks and airfields. They don't score air-to-air kills, so their names don't appear in ace lists. But they destroy the German war machine piece by piece. One of these pilots, name lost to history, keeps a diary found decades later in an estate sale. An entry from April 1944 reads, "Attacked a train this morning, got the locomotive, watched it explode, felt nothing. This isn't glory, it's just work that needs doing." That sentiment captures something essential about the P-47 and those who flew it. This wasn't about individual heroics or knightly combat, it was industrial warfare. The Thunderbolt was a tool, brutally effective, and the pilots were craftsmen wielding that tool with skill born of experience and training. The aces are remembered, and rightly so. But for every ace, there were 10 pilots who flew just as bravely, fought just as hard, and went home when the war ended without recognition beyond their squadron mates. The P-47 gave them a chance. In a war where so many died, that was everything. What did German pilots think of the P-47? Their opinions evolved dramatically over the course of the war. Early reports from 1943 are dismissive. Luftwaffe intelligence briefs describe the P-47 as a heavy fighter with poor maneuverability, vulnerable in turning combat. Large size makes it easy to acquire visually. Adolf Galland, general of the fighter arm for the Luftwaffe, comments in a 1943 report that the P-47 is no threat to our experienced pilots. The American pilots try to dogfight, and when they do, they lose. But by late 1943, the tone changes. Tactical reports start noting American pilots using new tactics. They no longer engage in turning combat. They attack from altitude with high speed, one pass, then climb away. Difficult to counter. German pilots learned to respect the P-47's firepower. Egon Mayer, a Luftwaffe ace with 102 victories, is killed in March 1944 when his Bf-109 is hit by P-47 fire during a bomber attack. Fellow pilots report his aircraft simply came apart in the air when the 50 caliber round struck. The ground attack capability terrifies German ground forces. A Panzer commander's after-action report from Normandy, July 1944. We attempted to move 2 companies of tanks to new positions during daylight. American Jabos, mostly the P-47, attacked repeatedly. We lost 14 tanks in 3 hours. Movement in daylight is impossible. By 1945, German pilots are flying less and less. Fuel shortages, lack of replacement aircraft, and overwhelming Allied numerical superiority make the Luftwaffe combat ineffective. When they do fly, encountering P-47s is considered extremely dangerous. A Luftwaffe pilot interviewed after the war, name withheld in the original document, describes his experience. The P-47 was not the best Allied fighter technically. The Spitfire turned better. The Mustang was faster and had better range. But the P-47 was the most feared because of what it could survive. You could hit it many times, see pieces fly off, and it would keep flying. And those 8 machine guns, if they hit you, you were finished. Heinz Baer, the ace from the opening of this script, survives his encounter with the P-47 in 1944. He's wounded but returns to combat. He ends the war with 220 victories, most against the Soviets on the Eastern Front. In post-war interviews, he's asked about various Allied aircraft. About the P-47, he says, "I learned not to underestimate it. Early in the war, we thought it was just a big target. But it was tough, and the pilots learned to use its strengths." By 1944, attacking a P-47 was a dangerous proposition. There's a story, possibly apocryphal, but repeated in multiple German veteran accounts, about a Luftwaffe briefing in late 1944. The intelligence officer is describing Allied fighter types to replacement pilots. When he gets to the P-47, he allegedly says, "If you encounter the Thunderbolt at altitude and you have no advantage, do not engage, break off and escape. It is not worth your life to pursue them." Whether that specific briefing happened is unclear, but the sentiment reflects a real shift. By the war's end, German pilots treat the P-47 with the same respect they give to the Mustang and Spitfire. The ultimate measure, in 1945, captured German pilots are asked which Allied fighter they least wanted to face. The Tempest and Mustang are mentioned frequently, but so is the P-47, specifically because it will not die and its pilots are aggressive. For an aircraft that was initially mocked, that's a remarkable turnaround. April 1945. Germany is collapsing. The Allies are crossing the Rhine, pushing toward Berlin from the west, while the Soviets advance from the east. The Luftwaffe is finished, most of its bases overrun, fuel stocks exhausted, experienced pilots dead or captured. P-47 groups fly what are essentially free-range missions. They're authorized to attack anything that moves. The objective is to destroy Germany's ability to fight, hastening the end. The missions are surreal. Pilots strafe trains that aren't shooting back because the flak crews have abandoned their posts. They attack airfields where dozens of aircraft are parked, perfectly lined up, with no defenders. Some pilots report feeling like they're shooting fish in a barrel. But the war isn't over, and people are still dying. On April 17, 1945, a P-47 pilot named Raymond Littge is flying a ground attack mission near Dresden when his aircraft is hit by flak. The Thunderbolt catches fire. Littge tries to make it back to Allied lines, but the fire spreads. He bails out at low altitude, parachute barely opens, and is killed on impact. Littge is one of the last American pilots killed in action in Europe. The war ends 3 weeks later. In the Pacific, P-47 operations continue through August. The final P-47 combat mission in World War II is flown on August 14, 1945, the day before Japan's surrender is announced. A flight of P-47Ns from the 318th Fighter Group attacks targets on Kyushu, Japan's southernmost home island. They encounter no resistance. Japan's will to fight is broken. When the war ends, thousands of P-47s are scattered across the world. The Army Air Force immediately begins scrapping them. Aircraft that were built in 1944, barely a year old, are cut apart and melted down. The military is focused on jets now, the P-80 Shooting Star, the F-84 Thunderjet. Piston-engine fighters are obsolete. Some pilots are given the opportunity to fly their P-47s one last time, delivering them to scrapyards. It's a sad ending for aircraft that carried them through the war. A few P-47s escape the scrapper's torch. Some go to foreign air forces, Brazil, Peru, Yugoslavia, France. They serve in secondary roles for a few more years. Brazil keeps P-47s operational until 1958, using them for ground attack in remote areas where their ruggedness is valuable. The last military P-47s anywhere in the world are retired by Peru in the early 1960s. By then, the type has been completely forgotten by the general public. In the United States, a handful of P-47s are preserved as museum pieces or gate guardians at military bases. They sit on pedestals, corroding slowly, paint fading. Most people walking past don't even know what they're looking at. Then, in the 1970s and 80s, the warbird restoration movement begins. Collectors start buying up old military aircraft, restoring them to flying condition. P-47s, because they were scrapped so aggressively, are rare, but a few survive in strange places. One is found in Peru, disassembled in a warehouse. Another in the Philippines, used as a children's playground, one in a farmer's field, partially buried. These aircraft are purchased, painstakingly restored, and returned to the air. Today there are about 8 to 10 airworthy P-47s worldwide. They appear at air shows, and when they fly, they're spectacular. That R-2800 engine produces a deep, thundering roar unlike any other aircraft. Pilots who fly restored P-47s say the same thing. It feels heavy, solid, powerful, like flying a truck, but a truck that can fight. So what's the final verdict on the P-47 Thunderbolt? It was never the fastest fighter. The Mustang and Tempest were faster. It was never the most maneuverable. The Spitfire and Zero could turn inside it. It didn't have the longest range. The Mustang could go farther, but it was the toughest, the most versatile, and the most effective overall weapon system of its era. It could fight at 35,000 feet, or at treetop level. It could escort bombers to Berlin or strafe trains in France. It could carry 2,000 pounds of bombs or 10 rockets. It could take punishment that would destroy other aircraft and still bring its pilot home. The pilots who flew it loved it. The ground crews who maintained it appreciated its reliability. The commanders who deployed it valued its flexibility. And the enemies who faced it learned to fear it. The P-47 wasn't elegant. It wasn't beautiful. It was a brute, a 7-ton hammer that won through raw power and toughness. But in war, that's often what you need. Not finesse, not style, just something that works every time, no matter what. The Thunderbolt worked. The German pilots who laughed at the P-47 in 1943 stopped laughing by 1944. Those 850 caliber guns, the ones they thought would be too slow to hit anything in a dogfight, proved devastatingly effective. The P-47 wasn't supposed to win. It was too heavy, too big, too unconventional. But it succeeded because someone had the vision to build it differently, and pilots had the skill to use it right. Next time you hear about the greatest fighter of World War II, remember the Jug. The airplane that proved toughness and versatility matter more than speed alone. If you found this story interesting, let me know in the comments what other underestimated weapons or vehicles you'd like to hear about. And if you haven't already, subscribe. There are more stories like this coming. Thanks for watching.